college football up for grabs? Will it be Nick Saban snagging just another title? And could that lead to bigger implications in the sport? We'll touch on that momentarily. Plus, Kirby Smart, who yesterday, the college football playoff, put out a tweet of Smart and Coach Saban together. And it said something along the lines of just a couple of legends hanging out, which, of course, I had to press pause, pump the brakes. Legend on Kirby Smart. Listen, I'm not even sure if he wins the national championship tonight that Kirby Smart should be considered a legend in college football. Now, I will make an argument that it is certainly a step in the right direction and maybe a legend in the mind's eye of Georgia fans if he can achieve what Vince Dooley did back in 1980, given the big gap. But seriously, a couple of legends? Now, look, Reese Davis was in the picture. Yes, I didn't see any mirrors, with two faces of Saban either. So I don't know. I just, to me, a little early to be tagging a coach who has not won a national championship as a legend, which I think begs the question. I mean, if we are going to carry on that premise for legendary status, right? And by the way, speaking of legends, over the weekend I finally did have a chance to digest the All Madden television show, that came out before John Madden died, just days before John Madden died. And I got to admit, man, it was great. I mean, it was really good. And to think about the tribute and the opportunity for Madden to be alive and to be celebrated is awesome. So we'll talk about that a little bit in the program here shortly. But nonetheless, back to the legend of Kirby Smart, if you will. I mean, it got me thinking about great college football coaches, because I don't think at this point you can deny he's a great college football coach. You look at the success that they've had at Georgia. You look at the fact that they've played in a national championship game. I mean, that gives you a little leverage. Maybe great might even be too far. It might be too much of a push forward. I think he's a great recruiter. He's a good coach at this point. Legendary status, I again, I'm not certain, but let's talk about coaches in college football history, because it got me thinking. Who amongst the greats or the, quote, legends in the sport never got a national title? So I dove into a list over the weekend to figure out who those coaches were. Pat Dye at Auburn checked in at number 5. He coached for the Auburn Tigers from 1974 to 1992. He passed away back in June of, I believe, 2021. He is on the list of being one of the greatest that never won the ultimate, of course, the national title. Now, second, or I guess next on that list, Gary Patterson and the incredible run that he had at TCU. Had a couple of years where they were right on the cusp of possibly being considered one of the participants in the BCS, but nonetheless never could kick in that door. Had there been a 4-team playoff back in 2009, that TCU team was undefeated. Alabama was number 1. That was the Alabama-Texas BCS National Championship game. TCU was beaten in their bowl matchup, I believe, by Boise State, who finished 14-0. But Alabama, Texas, TCU, and Cincinnati were the top 4 teams in the final release of, actually, it was Alabama, Texas, Cincinnati, TCU. TCU was 4th in that final release of the BCS standing. So in 2009, they would have been in there. And I think also the first year of the college football playoff, if my memory serves me correctly, I'll pull this up real quick if I can, but I want to say that in 2014, in the first year of the college football playoff, they were close. They were 3 going into the final week. They were 10-1. They actually got passed at the back end they were one of those teams in the controversy that took place with Florida State and Ohio State jumping in. Baylor dropped out in that scenario. So, excuse me, TCU dropped out in that scenario. So, again, I would like if you ask me to name legendary coaches, I got to tell you, I'm getting way down the list before I'm crossing over into saying Gary Patterson at TCU. Frank Beamer at Virginia Tech. Got to the national title in 1999, lost to Florida State that year. Michael Vick, simply phenomenal that entire season, but that was an entire team that he had to deal with when Bobby Bowden got his second championship. I mean, Beamer, legend. Yes, I think you have to say that about Frank Beamer. Without a national title, is Kirby Smart that? Far from it at this point, in my opinion, in his career. Bill Snyder, 2 tenures with the Wildcats out at Kansas State, 1989 to 2005. Then he returned in 09 through 2018. I mean, look, if you're talking about longevity, if you're talking about being a part of a program and being the face of a program, yes, that has to be somebody. But that's nearly 30 years of being the coach at Kansas State. That's not what we're talking about with Kirby Smart. And then last but not least, Bo Schembechler never won a national title. Never won a title. He coached at Michigan from 1963 until 1989. His teams finished inside the top 10 of the AP poll 16 times, including a stretch from 1969 to 1978, where they did it for 10 straight seasons. Schembechler, yes, has to be considered a legend in the sport. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And Schembechler, I think, gets a bump over Patterson and Snyder because of the school he coached at. I think that's probably one of the reasons that Pat Dye carries a little bit more weight, per se, for people, because he was coaching at Auburn, a more prominent program collegiately. Kirby Smart is absolutely crushing it on the recruiting trail. Again, I would make the argument, and it's not all Kirby Smart, but I, again, would make the argument that Kirby Smart is absolutely a legendary recruiter at this point. But in his tenure at Georgia, again, which is just 6 seasons, and they've been good seasons. Don't get me wrong. I mean, if you go about their conference record, since he joined the Georgia Bulldogs, skip his first year in 2016, in conference, they've gone 7-1, 7-1, 7-1, 7-2, and undefeated in conference play this year. Additionally, when you look at the Bulldogs, their overall record, outside of his first year, if you take the first year, an 8-5 season off of the books, I mean, he's gone 57-10. 57-10. And he's played in the national championship game. He'll play in another one tonight. They finished in the top 10 4 consecutive years in a row. But to me, to highlight him as, quote, a legend means that you have to achieve the greatest, and that is winning a national title, if you're going to crown the man as a legend 6 years into his coaching career. Like, that to me is the thing and the difference. I mean, honestly, if you talk about Dabo Swinney, in addition to the fact that Sweeney's coached longer, but Dabo Swinney has 2 national championships. He's a legend because of that fact. And for those people that want to argue it, and look, we can get into the numbers games of the run that Clemson's been on if you'd like. But the reality is, for Dabo Swinney, who has 2 national titles, if you look at the modern era of college football from 1936 to the present, Swinney has as many national championships as Auburn, as Michigan, as Penn State, as Tennessee. He has more national titles in his pocket than Georgia, than Texas A&M. I mean, and I'm just giving you the list of names that I think you guys would say resonate as potential national champions. I mean, that's what Dabo Swinney has done. As a matter of fact, if he gets another one at some point along the way, that'll be his third. That'll be Dabo Swinney's third as a head coach. That's as many as are at Florida and Florida State, and there are only a few programs with more than that in the history of college football. As for coaches, where does that put Dabo Swinney? Of the active coaches, he is second on the list behind Nick Saban, who's going for his 8th title tonight. The names in front of him, Saban, again, looking for number 8. Bear Bryant had 6. Woody Hayes had 5. Bernie Bayerman had 5 at Minnesota, all before 1941, by the way. Frank Leahy at Notre Dame had 4. John McKay had 4 at Southern Cal. Urban Meyer had 3, 2 at Florida, 1 at Ohio State. Walter Camp had 3 at Yale. Howard Jones had 3 at Southern Cal. Tom O'Brien had 3 at Nebraska. Newt Rockne had 3 at Notre Dame. Barry Switzer with 3 at Oklahoma. Pop Warner with 3 at Pittsburgh, or 2 at Pittsburgh, 1 at Stanford. Darrell Royal had 3 at Texas. Bud Wilkinson had 3 at Oklahoma. Then there's Dabo Swinney, along with what coaches you might say? Pete Carroll, Bobby Bowden, Tom Osborne, Dennis Erickson, Joe Pa, Ara Parsegian, Bob Devaney, and Red Blake or Black. I'm not sure how you say Red's name. He was head coach at Auburn in 1944 and 1945. I mean, like, legendary status to me requires having at least one national title in the books, unless you've got this unparalleled long-term career at a program like Frank Beamer did at Virginia Tech. I mean, honest to goodness, if you start to get into some of the other names with national titles on this list, it's hard to deny that many of these guys would be considered legendary. I mean, there are some names here or there. Gene Chizik won the national title at Auburn back in 2010. Chizik, of course, now joining the staff of Mack Brown at North Carolina to try to shore things up on the defensive side of the ball for the Tar Heels. Mack Brown has one at Texas. Who's going to deny that Mack Brown's not a legend in the sport you give, given his longevity? Steve Spurrier only has one in Florida. Nobody's going to deny he's a legendary head coach. Lou Holtz has one. I mean, Dabo Swinney has more national titles than those guys. Swinney's a legend, whether Gamecock, Bulldog, Yellow Jacket, or Seminole fans want to acknowledge it or not. I mean, he is simply because of the 2 national titles and the run that they've been on. And again, still very, very early in his tenure. I mean, Dabo Swinney could coach another 20-plus seasons if he chose to. But when you start talking about legends and when you tweet out that photo, I have to laugh a little bit or a lot. Because, text me. Let me know. 803-450-0086. I mean, am I wrong? I mean, is this a hot take? Is this Swanny leaning in too hard against the Georgia Bulldogs on what could be? They could be on the precipice of their second official national championship in their first since 1980. Is Swanny being too harsh? And it really isn't on Georgia as much as it is on the college football playoff for tweeting out the word legends. If you had said two greats, I wouldn't have batted an eye. If you had said, well, I don't know, because at some point with Nick Saban in the picture, like, you can't say too good, right? I mean, Nick Saban at the top of the mark all time and distancing himself pretty rapidly. I mean, with another victory, that gives him 8 titles. And when you think about Dabo Swinney and Clemson and the opportunities that they've had back in, I think, most notably the 2015 national championship, I really think that was Clemson's best team, the one that Alabama beat out there in Arizona with the onside kick and the kick return and O.J. Howard getting open every chance he got. Like, I still think that Clemson team was actually the better team that day. And if Swinney had won that one, then Dabo would have 3 right now, and Saban would only have 6. I mean, that gap feels a lot more narrow than it could tonight when Saban's sitting there at 8 and Swanny sitting there at 2. Not to mention the fact that Clemson had a really good chance, in my opinion, outside of the Clyde Edwards-Helaire foot out of bound, hand out of bound, no look back, little 14-point swing at the back end of that first half against LSU. Go back, rewatch that game again, and imagine that play gets officiated correctly. I still can't believe that. I still cannot believe that play. And again, LSU won the game by a wide margin late, but that moment was so key to just the ebb and the flow of that game, a momentum play and a huge miss by the officials. But if Swanny had gotten that one just in a hypothetical world and gotten that 2015 one, you'd be looking at 4 and 6, right? I mean, you'd be looking at absurd numbers for Dabo Swanny at this point in his career, but you're not. You're looking at absurd numbers for Nick Saban. And I think Saban gets number 8 tonight. I think Alabama by a wide margin tonight over Georgia. I don't think the Bulldogs are going to be able to keep this any closer than they did in the SEC championship game. And I think my biggest thought process or wonder coming into tonight's game is less about the outcome and more about the eyeballs. As I said last week, this is a rematch of the SEC championship game. And I don't know that there's a ton of interest in seeing that. Georgia, Alabama, when they played previously back in 2017, that game was not a rematch of the SEC championship game. The only thing maybe stoking the interest in this game for some people is the fact that these two teams had that classic overtime game in 2017. Because without that, and therein lies another thing too. Go back, forget it. You take Clemson's LSU game off the board. Like for those people that were hearing that conversation and thinking, oh, Swanny's off the deep end again. Forget that. Give LSU that title. But have Georgia hold on in 2017. And then you're looking at Saban at 6 and Swanny potentially at 3 with the win if he'd beat them. If he would have beaten Alabama in 2015, actually, that would be 5. Swanny would be at 3 and Saban would be at 5 right now, had that happen, because you got to switch the 2015 game to Clemson too. So, look, what Saban's done has been simply phenomenal. He is out, no question, a legend in this sport. And Dabo Swanny, also, his run, phenomenal, and a legend. Kirby Smart, if he wins tonight, which I don't think he does, but if he wins tonight, if you want to start talking about a legend, I'll hear you. I won't shut you down right off the hoof because he's got the gold. But you got to go win the gold before you get legendary status. I mean, think about the plays that they've had in big moments where Kirby Smart let that team down with just dumb decisions. That's not legendary. Stay with us.
Now,